Chapter 10 of The Hidden Places. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Hidden Places by Bertrand W. Sinclair. Chapter 10. "Why not go in there and take that cedar out yourself?" Doris suggested. They had been talking about that timber limit in the Toba, the possibility of getting a few $1,000s out of it, and how they could make the money serve them best. "We could live there. I'd love to live there. I loved that valley. I can see it now, every turn of the river, every cañon, and all the peaks above. It would be like getting back home." "It is a beautiful place," Hollister agreed. He had a momentary vision of the Toba as he saw it last. A white-floored lane between two great mountain ranges, green, timbered slopes that ran up to immense declivities, glaciers, cold, majestic peaks scarred by winter avalanches. He had come a little under the spell of those rugged solitudes then. He could imagine it transformed by the magic of summer. He could imagine himself living there with this beloved woman, exacting a livelihood from those hushed forests, and finding it good. "I've been wondering about that myself," he said. "There is a lot of good cedar there. That bolt chute your brothers built could be repaired. If they expected to get that stuff out profitably, why shouldn't I? I'll have to look into that." They were living in a furnished flat. If they had married in what people accustomed to a certain formality of living might call haste, they had no thought of repenting at leisure or otherwise. They were, in fact, quite happy and contented. Marriage had shattered no illusions. If, indeed, they cherished any illusory conceptions of each other, the intimacy of mating had merely served to confirm those illusions, to shape them into realities. They were young enough to be ardent lovers, old enough to know that love was not the culmination, but only an ecstatic phase in the working out of inexorable natural law. If Doris was happy, full of high spirits, joyfully abandoned to the fulfillment of her destiny as a woman, Hollister, too, was happier than he had considered it possible for him ever to be again. But, in addition, he was supremely grateful. Life for him as an individual had seemed to be pretty much a blank wall, a drab, colorless routine of existence, something he could not voluntarily give up, but which gave nothing, promised nothing, save monotony and isolation, and, in the end, complete despair, so that his love for this girl, who had given herself to him with the strangely combined passion of a mature woman and the trusting confidence of a child, was touched with gratitude. She had put out her hand and lifted him from the pit. She would always be near him, a prop and a stay. Sometimes it seemed to Hollister a miracle. He would look at his face in the mirror and thank God that she was blind. Doris said that made no difference, but he knew better. It made a difference to eyes that could see, however tolerantly. In Hollister also there revived the natural ambition to get on, to grasp a measure of material security, to make money. There were so many ways in which money was essential, so many desirable things they could secure and enjoy together with money. Making a living came first, but beyond a mere living he began to desire comfort, even luxuries, for himself and his wife. He had made tentative plans. They had discussed ways and means, and the most practical suggestion of all came now from his wife's lips. Hollister went about town the next few days, diligently seeking information about prices, wages, costs, and methods. He had a practical knowledge of finance, and a fair acquaintance with timber operations generally, so that he did not waste his own or other men's time. He met a rebuff or two, but he learned a great deal which he needed to know, and he said to Doris finally, "I'm going to play your hunch and get that timber out myself. It will pay. In fact, it is the only way I'll ever get back the money I put into that, so I really haven't much choice in the matter." "Good," Doris said. "Then we go to the Toba to live. When?" "Very soon, if we go at all. There doesn't seem to be much chance to sell it, but there is some sort of returned soldiers' cooperative concern working in the Big Bend, and McFarland and Lee have had some correspondence with their head man about this limit of mine. He is going to be in town in a day or two. They may buy." "And if they do?" "Well, then, we'll see about a place on Valdez Island at the Euclataws, where I can clear up some land and grow things, and fish salmon when they run, as we talked about." "That would be nice, and I dare say we would get on very well," Doris said. "But I'd rather go to the Toba." Hollister did not want to go to the Toba. He would go if it were necessary, but when he remembered that fair-haired woman living in the cabin on the river bank, he felt that there was something to be shunned. Myra was like a bad dream too vividly remembered. There was stealing over Hollister a curious sense of something unreal in his first marriage, in the war, even in the strange madness which had briefly afflicted him when he discovered that Myra was there. He could smile at the impossibility of that recurring, but he could not smile at the necessity of living within gunshot of her again. He was not afraid. There was no reason to be afraid. He was officially dead. No sense of sin troubled him. He had put all that behind him. It was simply a distaste for living near a woman he had once loved, with another whom he loved with all the passion he had once lavished on Myra, and something that was truer and tenderer. He wanted to shut the doors on the past forever. That was why he did not wish to go back to the Toba. He only succeeded in clearly defining that feeling when it seemed that he must go, unless this prospective sale went through, because he had to use whatever lever stood nearest his hand. He had a direct responsibility now for material success. As the laborer goes to his work, distasteful though it may be, that he may live, that his family may be fed and clothed, so Hollister knew that he would go to Toba Valley and wrest a compensation from that timber with his own hands, unless a sale were made. But it failed to go through. Hollister met his man in McFarland's office, a lean, weather-beaten man of 60, named Carr. He was frank and friendly, wholly unlike the timber brokers and millmen Hollister had lately encountered. "The fact is," Carr said, after some discussion, "we aren't in the market for timber in the ordinary speculative sense. I happen to know that particular stand of cedar, or I wouldn't be interested. We're a body of returned men engaged in making homes and laying the foundation for a competence by our joint efforts. You would really lose by selling out to us. We would only buy on stumpage. If you were a broker, I would offer you so much, and you could take it or leave it. It would be all one to us. We have a lot of standing timber ourselves. But we're putting in a shingle mill now. The market looks good, and what we need is labor and shingle bolts, not standing timber. I would suggest you go in there with 2 or 3 men and get the stuff out yourself. We'll take all the cedar on your limit, in bolts on the river bank, at market prices, less cost of towage to Vancouver. You can make money on that, especially if shingles go up." There seemed a force at work compelling Hollister to this move. He reflected upon it as he walked home. Doris wanted to go. This man Carr encouraged him to go. He would be a fool not to go when opportunity beckoned, yet he hesitated. There was a reluctance in his mind. He was not afraid, and yet he was. Some vague peril seemed to lurk like a misty shadow at his elbow. Nothing that he had done, nothing that he foresaw himself doing, accounted for that, and he ended by calling himself a fool. Of course, he would go. If Myra lived there, well, no matter. It was nothing to him, nothing to Doris. The past was past, the future theirs for the making. So he went once more up to Toba Inlet, when late April brought spring showers and blossoming shrubs and soft sunny days to all the coast region. He carried with him certain tools for a purpose: axes, cross-cut saws, iron wedges, a froe to flake off uniform slabs of cedar. He sat on the steamer's deck and thought to himself that he was in vastly different case to the last time he had watched those same shores slide by in the same direction. Then he had been in full retreat, withdrawing from a world which for him held nothing of any value. Now it held for him a variety of desirable things, which to have and to hold he need only make effort. And that effort he was eager to put forth, was now indeed putting forth if he did no more than sit on the steamer's deck, watching green shore and landlocked bays fall astern, feeling the steady throb of her engines, hearing the swish and purl of a cleft sea parting at the bow in white foam, rippling away in a churned wake at her stern. He felt a mild regret that he went alone, and the edge of that was dulled by the sure knowledge that he would not long be alone, only until such time as he could build a cabin and transport supplies up to the flat above the Big Bend, to that level spot where his tent and canoe were still hidden, where he had made his first camp, and near where the bolt chute was designed to spit its freight into the river. It was curious to Hollister, the manner in which Doris could see so clearly this valley and river and the slope where his timber stood. She could not only envision the scene of their home and his future operations, but she could discuss these things with practical wisdom. They had talked of living in the old cabin where he had found her shelf of books, but there was a difficulty in that, of getting up the steep hill, of carrying laboriously up that slope each item of their supplies, their personal belongings, such articles of furniture as they needed. And Doris had suggested that they build their house in the flat and let his men, the bolt cutters, occupy the cabin on the hill. He had 2 hired woodsmen with him, tools, food, bedding. When the steamer set them on the float at the head of Toba Inlet, Hollister left the men to bring the goods ashore in a borrowed dugout, and himself struck off along a line blazed through the woods, which, one of Carr's men informed him, led out near the upper curve of the Big Bend. A man sometimes learns a great deal in the brief span of a few minutes. When Hollister disembarked, he knew the name of one man only in Toba Valley, the directing spirit of the settlement, Sam Carr, whom he had met in McFarland's office. But there were half a dozen loggers meeting the weekly steamer. They were loquacious men, without formality in the way of acquaintance. Hollister had more than trail knowledge imparted to him. The name of the man who lived with his wife at the top of the Big Bend was Mr. J. Harrington Bland. The logger said that with a twinkle in his eye, a chuckle as of inner amusement. Hollister understood. The man was a round peg in this region of square holes. Otherwise he would have been Jack Bland, or whatever the misplaced initial stood for. They spoke of him further as the Englishman. There was a lot of other local knowledge bestowed upon Hollister, but the Englishman and his wife, who was a pippin for looks, were still in the forefront of his mind when the trail led him out on the river bank a few hundred yards from their house. He passed within 40 feet of the door. Bland was chopping wood. Myra sat on a log, her tawny hair gleaming in the sun. Bland bestowed upon Hollister only a casual glance as he strode past, and went on swinging his axe, and Hollister, looking impersonally at the woman, observed that she stared with frank curiosity. He remembered that trait of hers. He had often teased her about it, in those days when it had been an impossible conception that she could ever regard seriously any man but himself. Men had always been sure of a very complete survey when they came within Myra's range, and men had always fluttered about her like moths drawn to a candle flame. She had that mysterious quality of attracting men, pleasing them, and of making other girls hate her in the same degree. She used to laugh about that. "I can't help it if I'm popular," she used to say, with a mischievous smile, and Hollister had fondly agreed with that. He remembered that it flattered his vanity to have other men admire his wife. He had been so sure of her affections, her loyalty, but that had passed like melting snow, like dew under the morning sun. A little loneliness, a few months of separation, had done the trick. Hollister shrugged his shoulders. He had no feeling in the matter. She could not possibly know him. She would not wish to know him if she could. His problems were nowise related to her. But he knew too much to be completely indifferent. His mind kept turning upon what her life had been, and what it must be now. He was curious. What had become of the money? Why did she and her English husband bury themselves in a rude shack by a river that whispered down a lonely valley? Hollister's mind thrust these people aside, put them out of consideration, when he reached the flat and found his canoe where he left it, his tiny silk tent suspended intact from the limb. He ranged about the flat for an hour or so. He had an impression of it in his mind from his winter camp there. Also, he had a description of it from Doris, and her picture was clearer and more exact in detail than his. He found the little falls that trickled down to a small creek that split the flat. He chose tentatively a site for their house, close by a huge maple which had 3 sets of initials cut deeply in the bark where Doris told him to look. Then he dragged the canoe down to the river and slid it afloat and let the current bear him down. The air was full of pleasant odors from the enfolding forest. He let his eyes rest thankfully upon those calm, majestic peaks that walled in the valley. It was even more beautiful now than he had imagined it could be, when the snow blanketed hill and valley, and the teeth of the frost gnawed everywhere. It was less aloof. It was as if the wilderness wore a smile and beckoned with friendly hands. The current and his paddle swept him down past the settlement, past a busy, grunting sawmill, past the booming ground where brown logs floated like droves of sheep in a yard, and he came at last to where his woodsman waited with the piled goods on a bank above tidewater. All the rest of that day, and for many days thereafter, Hollister was a busy man. There was a pile of goods to be transported upstream, a house to be fashioned out of raw material from the forest, the shingle boat chute to be inspected and repaired, the work of cutting cedar to be got under way, all in due order. He became a voluntary slave to work, clanking his chains of toil with that peculiar pleasure which comes to men who strain and sweat toward a desired end. As literally as his hired woodsman, he earned his bread in the sweat of his brow, spurred on by a vision of what he sought to create, a home and so much comfort as he could grasp for himself and a woman. The house arose as if by magic, the simple magic of stout arms and skilled hands working with axe and saw and iron wedges. One of Hollister's men was a lean, saturnine logger, past 50, whose life had been spent in the woods of the Pacific coast. There was no trick of the axe Hayes had not mastered, and he could perform miracles of shaping raw wood with neat joints and smooth surfaces. 2 weeks from the day Hayes struck his axe blade into the brown trunk of a 5-foot cedar and said laconically, "She'll do," that ancient tree had been transformed into timbers, into boards that flaked off smooth and straight under iron wedges, into neat shakes for a rain-tight roof, and was assembled into a 2-roomed cabin. This was furnished with chairs and tables and shelves hewn out of the raw stuff of the forest. It stood in the middle of a patch of earth, cleared of fallen logs and thicket. Its front windows gave on the Toba River, slipping down to the sea. A maple spread friendly arms at one corner, a lordly tree that would blaze crimson and russet brown when October came again. All up and down the river the still woods spread a deep green carpet on a floor between the sheer declivity of the north wall and the gentler, more heavily timbered slope of the south. Hollister looked at his house when it was done and saw that it was good. He looked at the rich brown of the new cleared soil about it, and saw in his mind flowers growing there, and a garden. And when he had quartered his men in the cabin up the hill, and put them to work on the cedar, he went back to Vancouver for his wife. End of chapter 10. Recording by Roger Moline.